This week on Talking Real, it's time for another update from the legal line with some interesting questions that we've had come in. So this week we talk about eviction moratoriums, seller disclosures, and canceling the contract on the eve of closing.
These questions are always interesting. Listen to the answers on this episode.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 152 of Talking Real. Nabil, how are you today?
I'm all right. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a heavy week.
Yeah, it has. We'll just cut right to the chase. We unfortunately have very sad to report that we have lost one of our colleagues, Cristy Ksepka, who many of you have met. She's one of the more recent members of our staff that came on, but she came on as our professional development manager, and just sad to report that she passed away on Monday. And so, yeah, I'm sad, man.
Yeah.
It's
yeah, even in her short time, she made a pretty big impact on OAR. So
yeah, as most of you know, we're a small staff. There's only 10 to 11 people on staff that are, when we're full. And yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed working with Cristy. I got to work with her a lot on some of the recent educational courses that I've helped teach and things like that. And we're a small staff. We're all very close. We get together outside, so we get very close very quickly. And so it's very sad for sad for our staff, for our membership as a whole. She was a great employee that really was doing great things with our education, and of course for her husband and family, a very tragic loss. So want to let you guys know that, again, keep our staff and the family and everybody in your thoughts. And we'll put a link in the show notes as well. There's basically a post up on our website that we've got going up that has information about, memorial information, that kind of thing that if you were interested in, details about service, flowers, donations in lieu of flowers, those kinds of things. As we have that information available, we'll have a link in our show notes so you can check that out and kind of mourn with us on that.
Yeah, for sure. So as soon as that information is available, we'll make sure to get that out.
Yeah. So, hug your families and your friends and tell them that you love them, and, because you never know. So, but we still wanted to bring you an episode of Talking Real this week and try to give you some additional good information this week. We've had a number of things come up kind of over the holidays and recently, as 2016 is kicking off. 2016. Well, I don't know why I said 2016.
Jeff wishes we were in 2016 again.
I mean, it's been, we've lived, what do they say? Sometimes you experience, I forget the quote, but sometimes you experience decades and years, right? It's like time moves, like a lot of happens in a very short period of time, or may you always live in interesting times. And I think that is absolutely the case for the times we're living in the last year or so.
Yeah.
So sorry, 2016 is way past. As 2021 gets kicked off, had some questions coming in and some interesting issues as people are kind of picking back up after the holidays. And so we wanted to bring you a few sort of interesting things and some updates from the legal line this week on some different questions and things like that have come through, just to keep everybody up to date on kind of what we're hearing.
Yeah. I always like this topic because, you're taking something that a few people are experiencing and they've actually taken the initiative to get their questions answered. And here we can kind of spread that and tell everyone that, hey, these are some common things coming up. Just watch out for it. Save them some time and hassle, right, if they have to deal with that.
Yep, absolutely. So We've talked about a lot that words matter in contracts, and there's a lot of important things on how you do them to make sure you do them correctly to help protect your clients and guide them. And so, we've got some good information here for you today, I think.
Mm-hmm. So let's kick things off with the eviction moratorium, because I think that is a pretty timely and pressing matter.
Yeah. So with COVID going on, we've had some eviction moratoriums that have gone into place, and wanted to give you kind of an update because things have changed a little bit on those. And I've had a few questions come through on the legal line asking for information about kind of what's going on, where are we today with the eviction moratoriums, and what's been extended, what hasn't, and what can we do as landlords and what can't we do. And so we're going to put a couple links in the show notes on this. There's two we want to point you to. One is a really good summary from a website called Nolo, where you can just get a lot of good legal information, but also a link to a site on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that has some updated information as well. Both are good resources. So if you deal with landlords and investment properties, I think this is really important for you to go take a look at, because we do still have some eviction moratorium that's going on right now. And so it's all been extended, right? So everything originally was sort of set to expire at the end of the year, but it's all been extended for at least some period. And it depends on what kind of property you have and the status of the tenant of whether the moratorium applies or not. So it's a little convoluted, frankly. Like, this is not straightforward, and it is not necessarily consistent. So there's a lot of, it depends on your particular situation, right?
Yeah. When I was reading through all of this, there was, the brass tacks of, hey, it's been extended to January 31st, 2020. And then there were a lot of caveats that came under that.
Right.
That you have to, certain income levels, you have to have gotten you should have been qualified to get your stimulus check, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm glad you can clear all that up for us.
Yeah, we'll try. So there's basically like three different moratoriums that are in place. In effect, you've got one for FHA, one for mortgages backed by Freddie and Fannie, and then you've also got the CDC moratorium. Mm-hmm. So we'll start with sort of the easy ones, the FHA. So if the property in question is an FHA insured single family mortgage home, okay, so just single family FHA insured, then in that respect, there are no evictions for tenants of those properties through February 28th, 2021. So you've got through the end of February on those, which is the longest one that's been extended so far, through the end of February. So for any FHA single family homes, no evictions on those. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of detail in that. Then on top of that, there is the mortgage-backed properties by Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Those have been extended until January 31st, 2021. So through the end of January, if the mortgage on the property is backed by Freddie or Fannie, again, single family properties, then that goes at least until January 31st, 2021. And look, I wouldn't be surprised if these get extended again. It's sort of just as time goes on, we'll see, but this is where they are today. Also, certain owners of multifamily properties backed by Freddie and Fannie, they can extend their loan forbearance. And if you do, then you cannot evict tenants during the term of forbearance. So there's some additional information there if it's a multifamily property that's insured by Fannie or Freddie and you're taking advantage of some loan forbearance. So if you've got a mortgage on the property, you need to know what kind of mortgage and what those specific restrictions are to kind of understand that. So take a look at that. Those, you can go to your mortgage lender's website as well and probably see some information there, as well as the links that we've posted. So those are kind of the easy ones to start with. And then there's the CDC one that applies to all properties. Okay. So those are just Fannie, Freddie, FHA. So now I've got the CDC that applies to all properties. And this one is like, I don't know, it's weird. It's kind of convoluted. This one's been extended through January 31st, 2021. And it only protects tenants of like certain circumstances. So
this is the one with all the caveats.
Yeah, this is all the like, if this, right, then that. So basically, the order protects tenants who have used their best efforts to obtain government assistance for housing. They're unable to pay their full rent due to substantial loss of income. They're making their best efforts to make timely partial payments of rent, and they would become homeless or have to move into a shared living setting if they were to be evicted. And then in addition to that, one of the following financial criteria have to qualify in order for them to not get evicted. They have to expect to earn no more than $99,000 if they're an individual, or $198,000 if they file a joint tax return in 2020. If they've not been required to report any income to the IRS in 2019, or they've received an economic impact payment, which is a stimulus check under the CARES Act. So if any of those apply, and those four sort of checklist items as far as using their best efforts, then they can't be evicted. And the CDC, actually on the Nolo website, they've got a downloadable CDC eviction ban declaration that is a form that'll satisfy these questions. So you can send that to your tenants to make them certify that all these are true and correct. And if they're not, then, criminal penalties could apply and those kinds of things. So I've had a lot of questions come in about, well, they're not paying rent. They haven't paid rent for 5 months. And like, what do I do? So you need to follow these procedures. So check out the links in our show notes, and that will help guide you. These are very straightforward websites that have helped line this out, and they'll help guide you because, yeah, it is a little messy and convoluted, but we have at least moratoriums through the end of January. In some cases, into February might get extended. I don't know.
Yeah, evictions are always tricky, right?
Yeah,
and a little messy, and this just adds to it.
For sure. Now, there's also, NAR is encouraging all states to apply. So the state can apply for some housing assistance. It's actually for landlords in circumstances where the tenants aren't paying rent. So I think that there may be some of that, but there's an application that has to be done and all this by the state. We've encouraged our state to take a look at that and see if they can apply and get some funding to help support landlords and tenants that are in that need that housing assistance. So that's something that may be coming as well, but just can't really say for sure yet.
Yeah.
So messy.
So yeah. Right. So we'll add those links, as Jeff said, to the show notes, so you can check those out, read a little more, and make sure you're staying in the clear of anything that could go wrong.
Yep. Yeah. Just again, keep in mind that violating these orders can be subject to criminal penalties, fines, jail time. I mean, that's theoretically possible. So yeah, just kind of keep that in mind. Otherwise, outside of that, there aren't any other eviction moratoriums. The Oklahoma has basically done, the only thing they've done is there's an order of the Supreme Court that says anyone filing an eviction has to certify that the property is not covered under the Federal CARES Act. So all you have to do is certify that it's not subject to any of the moratoriums that are in place. So check that out. Just in case you do have a property that can go forward with an eviction, that you do that right. Always seek good legal counsel to represent you when you need. So yeah, that's the evictions moratoriums.
All right. So then on to question/issue number 2.
Okay. What is it?
Well, you know what it is.
I know what it is. I don't know which one. See, I sent them to Nabil in a particular order and he's gone out of order. So he's always throwing a wrench and trying to trick me.
No, this is not tricky. All right. So we'll jump to number 1. Canceling a contract on the eve of closing because the buyer doesn't qualify for lending by the closing company. Yeah.
This has come up a couple of times recently. And unfortunately, I think I've seen some issues where maybe it wasn't done quite right. And I'm pretty sure we talked about this recently on an episode. we had an episode where we talked about canceling the contract and like how to do that and what the implications are. And I don't remember what episode that was, but that was just recently. That's like been within the last, like maybe sometime even in December. I don't recall, but
yeah, I'm looking that up right now. So I'll find that episode number.
yeah. So the specific issue that I've seen is, people have a financing addendum. So they've got the loan addendum on the contract, which really allows the buyer to cancel the contract anytime up until closing if they don't qualify for the loan. So they're unable to secure the loan, not because they don't like the loan terms, but the lender will not give them lending, right? So they don't qualify. And in that circumstance, the buyer can terminate the contract and get a refund of their earnest money as long as they provide written notice of that prior to closing. So they can do it anytime up until closing, but you've got to have written notice. And I've seen a couple instances come up where it was just verbal notice. So they called and said, hey, we don't qualify for the loan, so we aren't going to be able to close and we're going to have to cancel the contract. But then they don't submit anything in writing before closing. And that's a problem because the contract specifically says written notice. That's what those loan addendums say. So be careful about that. Because again, I've seen this now, a couple of questions come up in the last couple of weeks. And what happened in some of these is really just a timing issue that because of holidays and COVID and everything else, the lenders were delayed. And so they couldn't qualify for a loan, or in some cases, the circumstances changed and they couldn't qualify for the loan. But you've got to do it the right way, because if you don't give that written notice of the cancellation, then the buyer may not get their earnest money back if the seller wants to dispute it. So, and in many of these cases, right, if you get to the day of closing and you're canceling the contract that day, the seller's not going to be real happy. So they probably, if they have an opportunity to dispute that, they're going to do it because they're going to think, well, what the heck? Surely you knew a week ago, 10 days ago that you weren't going to qualify. How are you just finding out on the day of closing? But at the same time, these things do happen. Some things are unforeseen, but just make sure if you have to cancel the contract for that, do it right in writing so that you can help make sure that those buyers get their earnest money back, and do things according to the contract.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what you would say is contract/lawyering 101, right? Put everything in writing.
Absolutely.
And that episode where we talked about canceling the contract for a myriad of reasons is episode 130.
Oh, that was a little further back than I thought. I knew it was recent though. Not that recent. 20 weeks ago.
So jump back to episode 130 if you want to take a listen to that and then get some more information about canceling the contract for various reasons and how to do that correctly.
There you go. Check it out.
Yes. And now the final legal line question. The seller property disclosure when the seller has a guardian and if they're incapacitated to fill out the disclosure form.
Yeah, this was a super interesting question that I'd never had before. And I thought was really kind of a novel, interesting question. And so here's the fact scenario. The seller that lives in the property or lived in the property at one point, right? If that's the case, then you have to do a disclosure form, right? You've got to list all the potential defects with the property and all that. You got to do the whole disclosure. You can't do the disclaimer form that says, well, I never lived in the property and I don't know about any defects, so I can do the disclaimer, right? But in this circumstance, that seller has a guardian, whether that's like a court-appointed guardian or something along those lines. They have a guardian that is handling their affairs, including in this case, the sale of the property. So the guardian is able to transact the business on behalf of the seller. Okay. And the question came up, what do we do? Do we have to do the disclosure or can we do the disclaimer? Because the actual seller is not the guardian, right? The seller is still the property owner who lived in the property. The guardian never lived in the property. But the guardian is the one who's kind of handling their affairs on their behalf. So the question is, how do we handle the disclosure? And I don't have like a great answer for this because the law doesn't specifically address it. So I kind of hedged a little bit and said, well, it sort of depends on the circumstance, and kind of posed the question, what's the status of the seller, right? Are they Is this somebody who maybe has later stage Alzheimer's, for example? And so they're not going to be in sufficient mental capacity to be able to fill out a disclosure form, right? That's not going to be an option because they may not be able to, remember, have that discussion, or there's all kind of issues there. And so in that kind of circumstance, or there are other circumstances where, again, it's maybe a mental incapacitation. Maybe somebody is in a coma. There's any number of scenarios that come up where the seller may not know. It could also be something like, for example, there's any number of possible scenarios that come up that really would involve that possible incapacitation. A different scenario would be where maybe the seller still is of sound mind and everything, but they have a guardian, maybe just because they're older, but they have a guardian that's appointed because, maybe they're paralyzed, or they're in a nursing facility or something along those lines. So they have a guardian that's able to help them with handling their affairs, but they're perfectly able to fill out the disclosure form if they have the guardian's assistance, right? They may be able to sit down and go through it together, and they've got a very clear memory and are absolutely of sound mind. So it's a circumstance like that where I would say, well, you might actually want to consider having that guardian help the person do the disclosure and be willing to provide that additional information about, that may be necessary, just because you want to avoid that scenario where you have an owner who actually could provide the disclosure and the information if they had that assistance from the guardian, and you didn't do it, because then there's the potential to have defects that should have been disclosed that weren't, and potential liability. But if the seller is completely incapacitated, they've got no ability to answer the questions or would not be reliable in any way, then in that circumstance, I'd say go ahead and do the disclaimer form and not do the full disclosure. And the guardian could complete that on their behalf. So kind of a weird scenario that came up that's there's not a clear answer one way or the other, but just something I thought was really kind of interesting that could come up from time to time with people. And in fact, look, today I could see a scenario with related to COVID, right? You could have somebody who's in the hospital on a ventilator, who's the seller of the property, who now has a court appointed guardian to help them take care of their affairs, including selling a property that they own, right? That's like a real scenario that could come up where that person's not available to answer the questions. They can't, they're completely incapacitated. So that guardian's going to have to do the disclaimer form if the guardian never lived in the property and doesn't know anything about it. So just kind of keep that in mind. If there's weird scenarios like that come up, make sure that you're handling those correctly.
Right. So kind of make your best effort to provide the disclosure. And obviously, if you can't, then that's why you have the disclaimer. Exactly.
So somewhat intuitive there, but kind of a weird scenario I never really had come up before or thought about. And I thought it was just kind of novel and interesting and wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, that's why when I was reading the question, I was like, wait, that was an actual question? Mm-hmm. I think my inflection kind of indicated what?
Yeah. So very interesting. So wanted to bring some of those with you. We always like giving you some updates from the legal line of some interesting things that come up. And if you've got a question, head on over to OKRealtors.com/legal. There's a form right there on that website that you can fill that out and send in a question, and I will get back to you just as soon as I can. Hopefully within 24 to 48 hours, sometimes delays if I'm out of the office or something, but doing my best to try to get those to you as quick as I can.
Yeah. And if you want your question to be featured on the podcast, send a tricky one.
There you go. Just tricky enough that I can actually answer it and not go, I don't know.
I'm recruiting other people to send you curveballs.
I appreciate that. It's always helpful. So, well, thanks for joining us again for this episode of Talking Real. We're going to keep bringing them to you every single week, and we hope that you bring yourself every week and also bring a friend. We appreciate when you make a referral to somebody else or a recommendation to listen to Talking Real and get somebody else on board with the joy that is weekly Talking Real every Tuesday.
That's right. And if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button so you know when that next episode is out. And leave us a rating, write us a review. We love getting your feedback. And as Jeff said, spread the love of Talking Real.
Absolutely. So until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.